Hello, friends. Welcome back to the channel. In our last episode, we explored Chapter 1 of Handbook of Abhidhamma Studies, the Introduction to Abhidhamma. We learned that Abhidhamma is the higher teaching of the Buddha, a systematic analysis of reality into ultimate truths. Today, we're moving into Chapter 2, which focuses on consciousness or Citta. This is one of the most important topics in the entire Abhidhamma. Why? Because consciousness is the very foundation of our experience. Without consciousness, there is no perception, no thought, no feeling, no awareness. But here's the fascinating part. In Abhidhamma, consciousness is not seen as a permanent soul or self. It's not something solid or unchanging. Instead, it's analyzed as a series of momentary events arising and passing away with incredible speed. In this presentation, we'll explore what consciousness is, how it's classified, the different types of consciousness, and how this analysis helps us in meditation and daily life. We'll also look at the ethical dimension of consciousness, how some states are wholesome, others unwholesome, and some simply functional. So if you've ever wondered what is the mind, how does awareness work, why do we experience joy, anger, or confusion, then stay tuned. This chapter will give us a deep dive into the Buddhist understanding of consciousness. Defining consciousness. In everyday language, we say things like, I am conscious or I lost consciousness. But in Abhidhamma, consciousness, citta, has a very precise meaning. Citta is defined as the awareness of an object. It is the knowing of something. Whenever you see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or think, consciousness arises. Now, here's the key. Consciousness is always paired with an object. There is no consciousness without an object. If you see a flower, there is visual consciousness of the flower. If you hear music, there is auditory consciousness of the sound. Another important point, consciousness is momentary. It arises, experiences the object, and then passes away. It does not last. In fact, according to Abhidhamma, consciousness arises and ceases billions of times in a single blink of an eye. So consciousness is not a continuous stream, but a series of discrete moments. This is radically different from how we usually think of the mind. We imagine a continuous I who is aware, but Abhidhamma shows us that what we call mind is really a succession of momentary consciousnesses. Classification of consciousness. Now let's look at how Abhidhamma classifies consciousness. There are 89 types of consciousness in the basic system and 121 types in the expanded system. These are grouped according to ethical quality and plane of existence. The main categories are 1. Wholesome consciousness, rooted in generosity, compassion, wisdom. 2. Unwholesome consciousness, rooted in greed, hatred, delusion. 3. Functional consciousness, neither wholesome nor unwholesome, but performing functions like seeing, hearing, or thinking. Consciousness is also classified according to the 4 planes of existence: sensual plane, ordinary human and animal consciousness; fine material plane, consciousness associated with meditative absorptions, jhana; immaterial plane, consciousness in higher meditative states beyond form; supramundane plane, consciousness associated with enlightenment, the paths and fruits. This classification helps us understand the vast range of mental states we experience, from ordinary sense perception to the highest states of wisdom. Wholesome and unwholesome consciousness. Let's go deeper into wholesome and unwholesome consciousness. Unwholesome consciousness arises when the mind is rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion. For example, when you feel anger, that moment of consciousness is rooted in hatred. When you crave something, that moment is rooted in greed. When you are confused or deluded, that moment is rooted in ignorance. There are 12 types of unwholesome consciousness in the Abhidhamma system. Each has specific characteristics depending on whether it is accompanied by joy, sadness, doubt, or restlessness. Wholesome consciousness, on the other hand, arises when the mind is rooted in generosity, compassion, and wisdom. For example, when you give with a pure heart, that moment of consciousness is wholesome. When you meditate with clarity, that moment is wholesome. There are 21 types of wholesome consciousness in the sensual plane, plus additional types in the higher planes. This analysis shows us that consciousness is not neutral, it has ethical quality. Each moment of consciousness plants seeds that shape our future experiences. This is the law of karma in action. Functional consciousness. Not all consciousness is ethical. Some are simply functional. For example, when you see a color, the visual consciousness that arises is functional. It just registers the object. It's not wholesome or unwholesome. Similarly, when you hear a sound, auditory consciousness arises. When you smell, taste, or touch, corresponding consciousness arises. These functional consciousnesses are important because they show that not every moment of awareness carries ethical weight. Some are just mechanical processes of perception. Higher planes of consciousness. Beyond the ordinary sensual consciousness, Abhidhamma describes higher planes of consciousness. In the fine material plane, consciousness arises in deep meditative absorptions called jhanas. These states are characterized by intense concentration, joy, and tranquility. In the immaterial plane, consciousness arises in even subtler meditations, where the mind transcends form and focuses on infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, or neither perception nor non-perception. Finally, in the supramundane plane, consciousness arises in the moments of enlightenment. These are the path and fruit consciousnesses that directly realize nibbana. This shows the incredible potential of the mind. Consciousness is not limited to ordinary perception. It can ascend to profound states of meditation and ultimately to liberation. Consciousness in cognitive processes. Abhidhamma also analyzes how consciousness flows in processes. When you see an object, it's not just one moment of consciousness, it's a sequence. First, the eye contacts the object, then visual consciousness arises, then attention, recognition, and reaction follow. This sequence is called a cognitive process, cittavati. Understanding these processes helps meditators observe how perception unfolds moment by moment. It shows that what we call seeing or thinking is actually a rapid succession of consciousnesses. Practical application. So, how does all this help us in practice? When we meditate, we can observe consciousness as it arises and passes away. We can notice whether it is wholesome or unwholesome. We can see its impermanence. This reduces attachment. Instead of thinking I'm angry, we see anger consciousness has arisen. Instead of thinking I am happy, we see happy consciousness has arisen. This shift in perspective is liberating. It helps us realize that there is no permanent self behind these experiences. There are just momentary consciousnesses arising and ceasing. Criticisms and clarifications. Some critics say the Abhidhamma's classification of consciousness is too complex. Why 89 types? Why 121? Isn't this overanalysis? But the purpose is not to overwhelm us with numbers, it's to give us precision. Just as a doctor studies anatomy in detail, a meditator studies consciousness in detail. Another criticism is that Abhidhamma was developed after the Buddha. But regardless of its origin, it remains a powerful tool for understanding the mind. Conclusion and reflection. So, to conclude, Chapter 2 of Handbook of Abhidhamma Studies gives us a profound analysis of consciousness. We've learned that consciousness is awareness of an object, momentary, arising and ceasing rapidly. We've seen its classification into wholesome, unwholesome, and functional types across different planes of existence. We've explored how consciousness flows in processes and how it can ascend to higher meditative states and ultimately to enlightenment. Most importantly, we've seen how this analysis helps us in practice. By observing consciousness, we can reduce attachment, understand impermanence, and cultivate wisdom. Think about it. Every moment of consciousness is like a ripple in a vast ocean. Each ripple arises, moves, and fades. When we cling to the ripple, we suffer. When we see it as just a ripple, we are free. This is the gift of Abhidhamma. It trains us to see the mind clearly, to recognize its patterns, and to let go of the illusion of permanence. So, as you go about your day, try to notice consciousness in action. When you see, hear, think, or feel, pause and reflect. This is a moment of consciousness. It arises, it passes away. It is not me, not mine, not myself. That simple reflection can transform your relationship with experience. Audience engagement and closing. Before we wrap up, let's bring this teaching into a more interactive space. I'd like you to reflect on your own experience. Think about the last time you felt strong emotion, maybe joy, maybe anger, maybe sadness. In that moment, what was happening? According to Abhidhamma, a specific type of consciousness arose accompanied by certain mental factors. It wasn't a permanent self feeling joy or anger. It was a momentary event, conditioned by causes destined to pass away. Now imagine if you could see every emotion like that. Imagine if you could watch anger arise and say, this is just anger consciousness. It will pass. Imagine if you could watch joy arise and say, this is just joy consciousness. It too will pass. Wouldn't that change the way you live? That's the practical power of Abhidhamma. It's not just theory, it's a lens that changes how we see reality. So here's a little practice you can try. Next time you feel a strong emotion, pause. Ask yourself, what kind of consciousness is this? Notice the mental factors that accompany it. Is there greed, hatred, delusion, or is there generosity, compassion, wisdom? Then remind yourself, this is impermanent. It is not me, it will pass. This simple reflection can bring peace, clarity, and freedom. And that's why Chapter 2 is so important. It doesn't just classify consciousness for the sake of classification. It gives us tools to observe, reflect, and liberate ourselves from suffering. So as we close today's session, I invite you to carry this awareness into your daily life. Notice consciousness, notice its qualities, notice its impermanence, and let that awareness guide you toward wisdom. Final closing. Thank you so much for joining me in this deep dive into Chapter 2 of Handbook of Abhidhamma Studies. We've journeyed through the definition of consciousness, its classifications, its ethical qualities, its functional roles, its higher planes, and its practical applications. We've seen how Abhidhamma turns the mind into a field of study, showing us that what we call self is really just a succession of momentary consciousnesses. If you found this exploration helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might be interested in Buddhist philosophy and meditation. In our next episode, we'll move into Chapter 3, where we explore mental factors, cetasikas. These are the companions of consciousness, the qualities that shape its ethical and experiential flavor. It's going to be another fascinating journey. Until then, may you be well, may you be peaceful, and may you continue your journey into wisdom.